somehow having no valves, it's a kind of purer thing, but it's also socially different. It's smaller, it's more intimate. You might play it in a salon. And I suppose then you really become aware of the way that music in general developed in the 19th century. What I just played involved some completely open notes, as we call them, so like you'd play on the modern French horn. So a note like this. I'm not doing anything, I'm just playing where that note sits, so just blowing normally. But then immediately afterwards there's a note which simply doesn't exist on this horn unless you make your hand cupped and put it a certain way up the bell. If I try and do that just with my lips, I'll get to, which is good in that it's an open sound, but bad in that it's totally out of tune. So a mixture of the two would probably be the best bet. So you get this beautiful shaded character immediately. So, there are sort of 3 or 4 different versions which are acceptable, but you choose the one which is most appropriate for the phrase, for that specific piece. So it adds an extra dimension. It adds a layer of difficulty because you then have a load more things to think about. But even the first 2 notes, you suddenly have so many musical options. Just to explain a little bit more about the natural horn and how to get the notes. The real difficulty is not just that some of the notes don't exist and that you have to do hand stopping. It's really that every single note will need either pushing up or down. So I'll play on in the phrase, and when I get to a note which is extremely flat, I won't change anything. I'll just play where it sits on this horn. I think you've recognized which note I'm talking about. So in order to get that higher, I'll basically use a bit more pressure on the mouthpiece, which is dangerous because you can use too much and cause havoc. But I'll also take my right hand right out of the bell. So you'll probably see me do it actually. I can only just make that note sharp enough, but in performance and hopefully on record, it'll probably sound like a special note with a special quality, extremely open and sort of light, but hopefully it'll add something to it in that it's very, very slightly flat but lifted. Whereas on the modern horn it would simply sound like every other open note. There would be no extra character. So in other words, there's an extra challenge to everything you have to do on the natural horn, but if you succeed, the payback is huge. This is the earliest horn I'm using on the recording. It's a Raoux from 1795. It makes a very, very different sound to a horn which I think is by the same maker, which I've borrowed from the Edinburgh Instrument Museum. That's the Raoux Cor Solo, which is superficially very, very similar, but makes quite a different sound. And actually this was in use in Paris in the late 19th century, believe it or not. This horn I'm using for Saint-Saëns and for Rossini. You know, again, no valves, and these other horns which I'll be using were already in existence when those composers were writing, but they just really enjoyed the hand-stop notes and the special timbre that you get from a valveless instrument. So you see, the major difference between these two is to change key, I put a crook in like this here, but this is attached, whereas on the older natural horn, the crook system is at the front there, and it actually makes quite a lot of difference to the playing characteristics. But this one that I mentioned before, the one from 1795, that was the most standard model. That was in use in orchestras for sort of 60, 70 years. This one, as the name suggests, cor solo, it's more of a solo instrument. It's not as flexible because you've got these bits which you can only alter to a certain degree. There are fewer keys, but actually this one works fantastically well in E. This length of tube puts this horn into E. The more research I've done into period instruments, the more that I've played, the more you realise there were huge differences and because of geography, just because of what makers were where. And I think composers wrote not knowing what equipment was going to be used. Of course, Saint-Saëns, in what we've just discussed, definitely knew what he was doing with the shades, the different colours. But I'm sure if someone had an early one-valve instrument, he would have been pleased with that. It's not a question of finding exactly the right instrument from exactly the right place to play that piece in the only way possible. It's just a way into what might have happened and a kind of inspiration for me to find my way with each different piece.